Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics.
Hello, welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. The Welsh Labour Party finds itself in the midst of a pivotal moment as it embarks on a leadership contest that will shape the future trajectory of politics in Wales. With the departure of Mark Drakeford, who's led the party and Welsh Government through a challenging period marked by COVID-19 and broader political shifts, the contest takes on a heightened significance. Against a backdrop of evolving societal demands, economic uncertainty, and the imperative to address pressing issues like healthcare, education and climate change, the Welsh Labour Leadership Contest emerges as a platform for candidates to articulate their vision for Wales and their strategies for navigating the complex landscape ahead. But has either candidate articulated any real vision or fresh arguments, or can we expect much of the same? Joining me, Sarah Rees, this evening as I take over the Hiraeth hot seat to talk through all things about the contest that will produce the next First Minister is the Welsh Liberal Democrat leader and MS Jane Dodds, and one-time Plaid MS and current consultant Bethan Syed.
Diolch.
I love to be on with Bethan as well. It's great, fantastic.
Yes, I'm not a Liberal Democrat, but Jane is one of the Liberal Democrats that I respect in Wales. Have a lot of time for Jane, raising lots of issues of importance in the Senedd.
Fab. So let's have a think about this. We've got 3 females on the pod this evening, and this is a really good place for us to start. But how disappointing do you think it is that Labour have remained without a female leader or even candidate on this occasion?
As the only female leader across the whole of the UK after Nicola Sturgeon stood down, the Green Party have a joint leader. I think it's so disappointing. You know, Labour, are saying they're the party of equalities and social justice, and they've never had, certainly in terms of the UK Labour Party, they've never had a female leader, and sadly this time we haven't got a female in the contest either. So I'm very sad. Don't know about Bethan.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of the Labour Party in Wales, at least, and the creation of the Senedd, you've seen people like, obviously Jane Hiraeth, who's still in the cabinet, but being a strong force in saying, well, Wales needs women in our Senedd. You had Carwyn Jones say he was going to be creating a feminist government, didn't he? I'm not sure what came of that, especially. And then we've always seen how they've used the electoral system in a way in which they can promote female candidates by having certain policies in place of positive action, like Plaid Cymru has had with trying to support women through the party. So it is very unfortunate in that regard, therefore, not to see a woman on that stage, because we know, don't we, as women here, that we might have seen manifestos look a bit different had there been a bit of clarity on women standing. The childcare element of both of the manifestos, for example, is a one-liner, 2 lines at the very most. So would the priorities be different if we had a woman in the mix? And I can say, yes, from the bottom of my heart. So yeah, that's why it's unfortunate. The diversity of discussion is limited by that very fact.
That's the question I was going to come to next. What do you think are the feminist credentials of their manifestos? I'll come to you, Jane.
Had there been a woman, there should have been an opportunity for them to step back and say, no, we're not going to put ourselves forward. If they really do believe in equalities, then, I would be saying, sorry, we're going to have an all-women contest, because actually, to be fair to Labour, they have had all-women shortlists. So why shouldn't they do it for this? And I think, as Bethan says, there'll be some really different perspectives: childcare, mental health. I think poverty would be there. The issues around parental leave, how we support women in politics more. I think there'd be some really very interesting dynamics. And I just think in 2024 that we haven't got a Labour leadership that just says, whoa, I'm stepping back and I'm going to actually make sure that I'm not, as a man, I'm going to really push the women forward. And there are some fabulous women in the Labour Party. You know, there are some young women, Hannah Blythen, Sarah Murphy, you know, there's some really great women, Rhiannon Passmore, all of, you know, there's some fabulous women who really need to be supported. And that support for me is actually saying a brave thing, which is, I'm not going to stand. Over to you, women.
Definitely. And do you think, Bethan, that you would have liked to have seen a woman stand for Plaid as
Well,
leader?
obviously obviously we've had a strong leadership Previously in Leanne Wood, but of course, you know, I think in terms of all political parties, nobody's immune to trying, you know, to issues in relation to prioritising a diverse platform of candidates from standing to widen the base of support for political parties generally. So that's a win-win, is it not? And to, as we've all talked about already, to deepen the discussion on various issues. So I think what it's showing is that we're not nurturing women enough. We're not mentoring them to come forward for these leadership positions. They perhaps don't feel confident enough to do so. When, for example, they've already seen 2 male candidates put their name forward, they'll say, well, I'm going to take a step back, therefore, and maybe I'll talk to them behind closed doors and see what I could potentially get from a cabinet position, as opposed to saying, you know what, I can do this and I can do it well and better, potentially, than the men. That's where I think women in Welsh society fall down all the time. So we need to be creating more networks for ourselves, despite what political party we come from, to really embolden each other and to say, yes, we can do this and we have the skills to do it. I've read the manifestos because I did a piece of freelance work for Climate Cymru, dissecting the manifestos from a climate change perspective, but I read it all just so I could see if they were mentioning climate change in other parts of their portfolios. But even looking at, you know, poverty and looking at the economic development elements of their manifestos is not joined up to what we would talk about the feminist agenda, not at all, you know. So I think that's where Jane was saying, you know, what could we be doing about flexible working and so forth. I can't see enough there to really make a difference, and that's unfortunate.
So maybe one of those things that we want on that list is to have more support for women to put themselves forward, not just in politics, but in all different areas of public life in Wales. Coming out aside from that question, what's your assessment of their approaches to the campaign so far? Is there anything inspiring you've seen at all?
It's been really interesting, and I'm sure you've all watched, you know, the Siambr and the Senedd throughout the campaign, and you know I guess what's been interesting for me as a complete outsider, and I've no links in with Labour at all. I've no inside knowledge here, but I think what's been interesting for me is to see the way that they have both kind of become a little bit more leaderly, I suppose. And I just linking that back to the previous conversation, I kind of think that's really sad that they have to kind of change the way that they are, because you know what I think we saw in Mark Drakeford was somebody who wasn't somebody who flexed his muscles, who was like bullish, who was, you know, just fair and firm. Didn't seem to change his personality. I mean, Bethan may know more because she was in the Senedd before me and saw Mark, you know, when he wasn't First Minister. But I kind of think, you know, we want somebody who not always leads from the front, but leads and, you know, makes sure that they are walking the walk. And I'm not sure we're seeing that in either of the candidates. I think as well, just one quick comment on what Bethan was saying before. For me, supporting women is actually men doing it. I think we as women need to do it, but actually we need the men to do it. And that's just exactly what I've said. They step back, they really do. I mean, not to boast, but in the Liberal Democrat leadership election for Wales, there were no men. We were 2 women competing against each other. And I just think we just, you know, we need to just say butt out. it's time for women now to lead. So
Well, maybe that's what we're doing here on the podcast. The guys have butt out and give me a chance. So maybe they
absolutely.
could learn something from us. Bethan.
Well, the only thing I'm hearing really from the inside are people who are part of trade unions who are now have a vote and are messaging me, and not in the Labour Party, by the way. So they're, whether they're Plaid Cymru or whether they're activists that I'm part of groups of, they're messaging me, finding it, quite funny now that they have this vote in this leadership election, and some are voting tactically, that would, mean that they would be thinking of who would be the least attractive to Plaid Cymru voters, for example, or how can they make a dent in somebody else's, perhaps somebody who is at the forefront of the campaign at the moment, how can they make a dent in that? So I find it a bit weird, because obviously that's not how we operate in Plaid Cymru, because the trade unions have this way into the Labour Party. So it's very odd looking at it from that perspective. And I know there's been issues around that, people who are part of this blog, this podcast, have talked about publicly on X about, how this voting is happening, and some people having more than one notification. So, I mean, we have to sort of secure that the election is going to be legitimate and fair in the first instance. But in relation to the leadership and what they're doing, from the outside, I'm barely involved. I think it's just been about how they've been talking to the Labour Party, and I think that's unfortunate, because they're not only going to be the leader of the Labour Party, they're going to be the First Minister of Wales, and I don't see them reaching out enough. I know, for example, that one of the candidates pulled out of a visit to a mosque in Cardiff, and for reasons I'm not aware. But if they're not going to do those things to try and reach out to new communities, then how are they going to be able to engage with them ongoing? Do they want to engage with them ongoing? So they have to remember, this is, yes, about votes within the Labour Party, but it's much, much wider than that. It's about leading a nation. And I think that's not really getting through at the moment. So from the outside, it's barely touching me unless I go and look for the information, like the anorak that I am. But, I don't see their efforts to get anybody else's support really at the moment.
So outside of us anoraks, then it's what do the general public think of either one, and do they know either one very well? I think both candidates have stated experience in their campaigns. Both have held several ministerial portfolios. But what about their record in post? Surely that's got to play for something here.
Oh, well, I mean, I think I saw the Politics Wales today, and Will from Wales Online was on there talking about, the legacy of Mark Drakeford, and Mark Drakeford having been popular up to the point at which people were campaigning for a Welsh COVID inquiry. And so what I'd say is that, if you look at Vaughan Gething's legacy in relation to the COVID inquiry at the moment, it's not looking especially positive. Even if you look at the initial stages of the COVID inquiry about him not having read his papers, regardless of what else it comes from it, that isn't a good look for the Health Minister of Wales. And I was involved in the Chris Wade incident, whereby Chris Wade was attacked people who were patients in the NHS in Cardiff, and the interview that Vaughan Gething did was about Chris Wade, and that was the one that he walked away from, which has now become viral. So I am worried about the fact that Vaughan Gething seems to want to evade questions, and it seems to be happening throughout this leadership race as well. With regards to Jeremy, well, I've got a different relationship with Jeremy in the sense that I was chair of the Culture Committee in the Senedd. So I not only saw him and experienced him as a minister, but also as somebody I was working with as a backbencher. And himself and Lee Waters were like a double act on my committee, always questioning, always scrutinising. But, they may have been difficult on occasions to say, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, or this needs amending. But I did like their enthusiasm and the way that they came, having always read their brief, always willing to cooperate. So what I will give for Jeremy is maybe not having seen the world change as part of his government roles, but knowing genuinely that he is a hardworking person is something that I will put to him. Whereas I find Vaughan Gething more difficult to have a relationship with, and I'm happy to say that publicly, because I don't feel that he's been someone who has ever really spoken to me in all the time that I was elected in the Senedd, unfortunately.
Yeah, if I just come in there, I mean, my experience of both of them is really not as long as Bethan's. I think they've both got different characteristics. I really don't have a strong view, which is a shame, isn't it, on either of them. I don't have this sense, oh, I definitely want that person to win, or I definitely want that person to win. And I think Bethan's made a really good point there. That it doesn't feel like they've got a vision for the whole of Wales at the moment that is about the different aspects of the whole of Wales. And I'm bound to make this point. They are both South Walians. They're both from South Wales. And, you know, us here in Mid and West Wales, for example, and North Wales, you know, we're always getting a bit of a raw deal here when it comes to the First Minister, because it should be a First Minister for the whole of Wales, which is why I would have wanted to have seen a much more diverse breadth of candidates. You know, some of the, as I say, some of those women would have been absolutely amazing because they also bring a different experience from a different part of Wales. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting whoever's the winner. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but if Vaughan Gething does win, we will have in Great Britain for maybe a short period of time, who knows, 3 leaders who are from the Black and minority ethnic community. So potentially until the next general election, Scotland, Wales and England, or Westminster, will have 3 leaders, all men, unfortunately, from Black and minority ethnic groups, which I think will be fascinating. You know, I think that's sort of positive, showing, you know, the UK, Great Britain in a very different light to the rest of the world. We are a diverse country, and I think that will be interesting. But they're all men, you know. Going back to that issue, 3 women here, we're really we're showing how it should be done.
But I think looking to the positives of what you've said there, you know, it's about time that as Great Britain, we did show that there were some good things for the rest of the world to be looking at us for, rather than many of the negatives of late. I think I'd like to go down to a few different policy areas. So let's look at health. You know, you've got Vaughan Gething. There's a double-edged sword with his previous health post. He's recognised much more than Jeremy, but that record isn't really one to shout about, maybe. What's your thoughts on the candidates' proposed healthcare reforms?
Again, I'm going to defer more to Bethan here, but I think, you know, Vaughan's record in health wasn't great, as Bethan has already said. I think they've both got interesting perspectives on health. And of course, there'll be a cabinet reshuffle, won't there? Whoever wins, I imagine, there'll be different people in cabinet roles there. I think in terms of some of their proposals around economic development, if I can just touch on that, I think, you know, maybe Vaughan's background in that is stronger, and maybe he's got that experience, which is different. But I kind of feel Jeremy's experience in social justice and that kind of angle is really much more interesting. I think they both bring different things.
I think what struck me the most was that Vaughan Gething led his whole manifesto on health. So the top line was health. I mean, the suggestion and the ideas within it wasn't very radical, but he was leading on that. And I found it interesting, of course, following our previous conversation on the COVID inquiry and some of the perhaps negative effects that have come to him from having the health portfolio. It struck me as quite bold in a way to lead on health in that regard then. He wasn't hiding away from it in the sense, unless he's just not deterred or not thinking that there's going to be that much scrutiny on him emanating from the COVID inquiry, as we know that the plurality of the media is quite weak here in Wales. So I can't see that there was anything that was going to rock my mind on health, but he did lead with it. Whereas Jeremy led on the green agenda, saying that he wanted to create a green stimulus and mentioned green so many times, I forgot how to count them in the manifesto. So you could see a bit of a divergence of where they were going with what their plans would be for a future First Minister. But I think, you know, their teams must have got wind of each other's manifestos. There's a lot of similarities in them, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's child poverty, whether it's climate change. For me, and I'm sure Jane would agree, and Sarah, having worked, you know, in the political world as well, it's how they implement it. You know, we can all write manifestos, we can all say we'll do this and that and the other and change the world with it, but unless we see implementation and real change, then those manifestos are not going to do very much. So, you know, let's see what the proof is in the pudding, who wins and who will actually deliver on those key changes.
Definitely. I think quite a few people that I've spoken to have said it's not so much what's in the manifesto, because they are very similar, but it's how will those things be delivered, because they've got very different style. Bethan, I will come to you specifically on environment, because you mentioned that you had looked at that particular part of the campaign. So how do you view the candidates' climate change policies? Do you think there's opportunities for collaboration across party lines, maybe, on some of these environmental initiatives?
Yeah, so I mean, there's strength in both manifestos. The only thing I would say that's glaringly missing in Vaughan Gething's is the fact that he doesn't say anything about holding the current ban on fracking, and says nothing about holding the current ban on mining, whereas Jeremy Miles does mention that. And that's, a pretty big thing when you think about the fact that, we're in a situation now about looking at how we can transition jobs into the green economy. To not mention it at all is pretty weak, I would say. Jeremy Miles does mention working more with community renewables, looking to try and invest in that, and also mentions that he wants to really continue the work of Mark Drakeford and the manifesto of the Labour Party. So that says to me that there's things there that he would continue, whereas Vaughan doesn't really nod to that at all. My concern with the manifesto from Vaughan Gething is, saying that he wants to invest in green jobs and a just transition, but then saying, well, really not at the detriment of Port Talbot. And, is that going to be possible? Let's be frank about it. If you're going to make sure that the works in Port Talbot do change for the future, jobs sadly will be lost. And so I'm wondering how both candidates are going to manage that if they win, because that's going to be very, very difficult for that particular area and for Wales. But, the one other glaring omission from Vaughan Gething is there's nothing there on the global impact of Wales and our climate obligations, whereas thankfully Jeremy does mention that we don't live in a vacuum, so we can't just talk about climate change just about Wales. We have to be looking at what more we can do for the world as well.
Exactly. I think if we're looking to a just transition, that isn't just us in a vacuum. We're a nation that's part of a world that has to make a bigger change, aren't we? Jane, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think, the big one for me, and Bethan's touched on this, is not committing to keeping coal in the ground. And really, to think that Vaughan is not doing that is unconscionable, really, because that is a basic. We are 2024, as we've said, and Jeremy has said that. He has said that. I mean, we've got some big fights still to have on that, with Aberpergwm, for example. So, for Welsh Labour and one of the prospective leadership candidates not to really commit to that is unbelievable. So, yeah, I think that's a real negative, a real deficit in Vaughan's commitments for the future.
So moving on, I think there's further more controversy. Our rural communities seem to have been alienated by Labour recently. In your opinion, how do you think the candidates intend to engage with and address some of these unique challenges faced by rural communities? Jane, I'll come to you. You've obviously in a more rural region. How do you think things have gone down in the last week?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a big one, isn't it? I mean, I think Welsh Labour are not flavour of the month with the farming and agricultural community and with rural communities, many of which are Welsh speaking as well. So I think where we're up to is Vaughan feels he's more bullish and more kind of, not take them on, but, I'm going to really be clear here where we need to go. My understanding is that Jeremy's a lot more kind of open to negotiating and using perhaps language which is more enabling. Yeah, the rural community, farming community. I mean, I can't tell you what it's like here. It feels really like it's bubbling and boiling over. And we saw the big demonstration last week, but I also went to a huge farmers meeting here in Brecon, 500 farmers, and that wasn't one that was where there was concern around infiltration from the right. That was just pure farming and agriculture, and really the mood was one of sadness, that they were in a place where they felt that they weren't being recognised and weren't being heard. So the leadership candidates, they have to step up. and whoever's the next First Minister should not be repeating some of the language that Mark Drakeford's been using. It needs to be reaching out, listening, and adapting, because, you know, they're the experts. And I think we need to be listening to them and working with them to take them on the journey to net zero, because if we don't do that, then we won't get anywhere. They would just, in my view, they'll just become more entrenched. So the journey to net zero, along with food production, is paramount. And I think they need both of them need to be reaching out. And I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen them really reaching out to our rural communities. And neither of them are from rural communities either, which, yeah, that's my thinking.
And kind of going on from what you mentioned there about being in meetings with farmers, and what do you think the opposition parties could do to enhance efforts to engage with rural communities?
I think we're doing our best. So the three of us, across Plaid Cymru and the Conservatives and myself, I realise I'm just the one. We are working together to try and look at how we can be enabling and bridge that sort of, you know, that widening gap between Welsh Labour and the farming and agricultural community. You know, it still needs to be clear that we want to see, you know, the climate change and the planet have to be really central, but we need to take them on the journey. So I think we've been trying to look at how we can work together, and the sustainable farming scheme, which everybody knows about, you know, I think needs to change considerably. I was shocked. I really was shocked at the level of demands for farmers. Forget about 10% trees, that's in there. But there are 17 universal actions which every farmer has to adhere to before they get a basic payment. Now, you know, that's hugely burdensome and hugely unwieldy. So I'm hoping there will be a change, and I'm really hoping we can work together to bring people across that divide and to look at how we move forwards.
Definitely. So we've picked a few big ticket policy areas for you this evening. But I think what I'd like to know from your perspective is, what do you think that our next FM has to focus on? Wales has got a lot of hot potatoes, but what would be the one for you?
For me, it is the climate emergency. I mean, that is the big one. That is the real big one. But the cost of living crisis and the health service come really within that ambit as well. But I want to see them really moving forward in terms of renewable energy, in terms of insulation, in terms of keeping coal in the ground. You know, all of that for us as a nation in Wales really says we're different. But the health service is huge, dentistry, GPs, along with childcare as well. I'm going to throw that in because that's linked with poverty. Child poverty in Wales is 28%. You know, we haven't moved. In fact, it's got worse. So there's so many out there. I mean, you know, now you've got me started, and I'm sure Bethan's got perspectives on others, but those would be my top 3 or 4.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously I'd agree with Jane in terms of the climate emergency, but I feel like we could go into lots of different details of, you know, different areas of interest. But it's just about trying to be bold and to show leadership in a very difficult time. So I feel people are starting to lose faith in the Senedd by default of perhaps having issues with Welsh government, still not fully understanding how devolution works. And so I think we sometimes need to get back to basics and go out more to communities to engage with them about what the Senedd does, and what Welsh government does, you know, and how we can create more citizen assemblies, which is something that I know the climate movement has been calling for, so that people feel that not only that their vote matters, but their voice along the journey does as well. And I genuinely believe, you know, to make a party political point, that this party has been in power for too long. They're fatigued. They're running out of ideas. We can see by the way in which some of the scandals in the press over the leadership contest, some of them are not responding, or they're closing their ears to criticism. That shows that that's a party that's been there for too long. So for me, regardless of who that First Minister is, we need a total radical rethink of politics in Wales, and to try and get more and different communities involved. I could be here all day talking about, you know, this policy, this policy, this policy, but I think it's about where Wales wants to sit in the world. And at the moment, we're not looking very good in the grand scheme of things. Sorry to be pessimistic.
Don't apologise. I'll bring you to a couple of specific policies, maybe what Labour might have considered some of their radical policies. How do you think either of our new candidates will handle the fallout of 20 miles per hour and the enlargement of the Senedd, for example? Do you think they're both here to stay?
I do, yes. Sorry, Bethan, you go.
Well, that's what I didn't mention in the climate change analysis, was that Jeremy had mentioned in his manifesto that he was going to commit to a review. And I know he's publicly said that because I've been on panels with him. But I was looking in Vaughan's, I actually messaged lots of MSs who supported him saying there's nothing in his manifesto on the 20 mile per hour zone. So I take that as he's just going to carry on with it. And he didn't want to mention it to draw more attention to it. So I don't think a review is going to do anything but just tinker at the edges of where some of these roads may change in its operational purposes, but I think that it's here to stay in that regard. What was the other one?
The other one we had is the increase in the number of Senedd members.
Oh, well, you know, I mean, if you asked me this in 2007, you're asking me this in 2024, it's never popular to get more politicians into any establishment. So the challenge will be trying to encourage people to understand why it's important, but not for us or for me previously when I was elected, for Jane as an elected representative now, to go, oh, woe is me. I think for the actual people on the ground, it's going to be right, because we're going to get those extra MSs. We can, you know, get more finance into your area. We can change the way your community is run so that it doesn't become a discussion just for the bubble because it would make life on a committee easy. That doesn't mean anything to you know, Mrs. Jones in Merthyr. So it's how we make that real for people. But it's going to be a challenge. I'm not saying it's going to be easy.
Yeah, and just to come in, I mean, I agree with everything Bethan said, and I'm kind of hoping it will make a difference for Bethan as well, potentially. Who knows? I agree. I think we are in the bubble, and just on Senedd reform, it means nothing to anybody apart from the outrage at the numbers. You know, we need more doctors, nurses, etc. But why do we need more politicians? Well, I think we know. And had you asked me before I'd been a Senedd member, I would have said, no way, that's ridiculous. But now I'm in it, I can see exactly why, with more devolved powers, and we want more and more and more, we are looking to how we can be more effective. And part of that has to be that we have to fight for more. We have to get more into Wales, more money, more opportunities. We have to be a country that punches above our weight. We have to be a country that's radical and revolutionary. And to do that, you know, we do need more people who are there talking on behalf of their communities, who are representing them, who have the time and the energy to do citizens' assemblies, for example. Because I think, you know, with the increase, we should be looking at how we are going to not just be more democratic in the Senedd, but how we're going to be more democratic in our communities as well. How we're going to be looking at more participatory budgeting, how we're going to be listening to people on the ground about what they want to see in terms of renewable energy in their communities. There's an onus on us, and that's quite exciting, but it's quite scary as well. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be re-elected in 2026. I'm hoping that I might be there with Bethan when we can maybe do something together. Who knows? Yeah, I think that's what I'd like us to focus on, which, you know, is really important.
So given we've all agreed that we're quite passionate about this policy, but it's going to be difficult to get it across to the wider public, which candidate do you think is likely to be more successful in pushing that through?
Well, I think it's kind of not a done deal. Obviously, Senedd reform bill is up next week for stage 2. I think though it's the selling it to the public is justifying, is saying, yeah, okay, we've agreed more members, but this is what it's going to be, as Bethan has said, for your community. This is why we want it. It's not just me, or my party needs more people in. It's about us saying we want a more pluralistic Senedd. We want a Senedd which actually is representing you locally. So I don't know who's going to be better or worse at that. I'm not sure. I think probably Vaughan is probably just going to be perhaps more kind of assertive and saying, yeah, it's gonna happen. I can see Jeremy engaging more with communities on that. If I'm honest, I think he's got that personality, which is, drawing people in. So that's my thinking.
I just wanted to come back on the fact that, I'm saying, we have to talk about how it affects communities, but then I'm really, really finding it difficult to even support myself with the closed list system that's been agreed and by my own party as well, as part of the negotiation, because I stood for election one term and they had told us that they weren't going to put our names on the list for when people went into the ballot boxes. Myself and Di Lloyd and Peter Black, we complained about this because we not only had a party that we were members of, but by the point at which we were standing, we had people who were voting for us as well as individuals. And so I feel that you need to be able to put individuals' names on there so that people can see, yes, oh, that's somebody I know who's linked to that party. And also that it doesn't become something that party hierarchies dominate and decide who their best people are, the people who they think will be loyalists, who may not rock the boat. So that is one thing I think I'm struggling with, because I want to see more politicians there. I want to see have a stronger Senedd. Of course I do, but I'm really not a fan of that closed list system.
Have you met anyone yet who is a fan?
Well, we took evidence. I was lucky enough to be on the Senedd Reform Committee. Nobody who gave evidence supported closed lists. Labour are appalling on this. They really are. And I'm sorry to say, Plaid Cymru, had they not supported Plaid Cymru, not supported them, I think there was a chance of movement on it. But Bethan's right. This again means nothing to people. It's power to the party, not power to the people. And we'll see what happens next week. There will be some lone voices like me just saying, this is shocking that in 2024, we are not allowing people to choose the person they want. It's the party. That's what Labour are wanting, and with Plaid Cymru support, they're saying we're going to have the party decide who's going to be on that list. We're close. That's just an appalling way of doing democracy. It doesn't give any faith in it at all. So
moving on from that, I think, we are coming under increased pressure, aren't we, in our Senedd? Do you think what we have here is safe, or will the new First Minister have to bring parties together to defend our fledgling democracy? We've talked about lots of different issues here, and when we've seen lots of difficult period, just over the last few months alone.
By virtue of this being a devolutionary settlement, there's always the fear that it could be rolled back. And that's been the fear when we had the referendum, the failed referendum back in the day, and then when we set up the Senedd in 1999, and then when we had the subsequent referendum, that's why I'm in a party that believes that we should have independence for Wales, and we can discuss then, the type of independence we want, but that gives us the security and the knowledge that we are the masters of our own destiny. We have our own autonomy over things. We're always going to be tied to Westminster and the threat of resources being pulled or our powers being pulled. Look at what happened with the trade unions bill. Look at what's happening now potentially with the boycott divestment bill. They potentially can ride roughshod over decisions made by the Senedd that we disagree with them on. So it's constantly a worry, and therefore I think we have to continuously create good laws, continuously show how strong we are as a nation in our parliamentary democracy, so that those threats don't come about. And if we see a Keir Starmer Labour government, well, what difference will we see? I'm not sure for now.
Yeah, I agree with Bethan. I think, with the greatest of respect to Bethan, we agree on 99.99% of things, apart from independence, of course. And I really will be interested, and Bethan's just touched on this, to see, what happens when we have a Labour government, which is what probably we will have in Westminster this year, and what difference will it make to us here in Wales with a Labour government? Will it make a difference? Because if it doesn't, then there's going to be a lot for that new First Minister to be talking about and actually defending. It'll be much more difficult. But I suppose I believe in the federal model, although I've banned that word now, federalism, because nobody knows what it means. I say it means a partnership of equals. And that, for me, is where I think we need to be going. And the new First Minister needs to really assert themselves quickly, not just with the Conservative government, which is where we'll be when they get elected, but going forward, we need to see the evidence of how they're going to change Wales for the better with a Labour government. And let's see, the proof will definitely be in the pudding.
It definitely will. I was going to ask, actually, you know, if that's one difference is on independence, then, you know, what we hear of a lot in my end of the spectrum is, you know, Wales hasn't got enough money at the moment. We can't do anything to support, you know, anti-poverty, lots of the issues that we talk about in the third sector. You know, is it that fiscal settlement that we need to push for?
Yeah, and I think that's what I've seen Plaid's narrative focus on for the Westminster election so far. I've seen some criticism of it, but I mean, I don't know what people want Plaid Cymru to focus on at a time when we're in a cost of living crisis. You know, interestingly, the manifestos don't mention, you know, much about budgetary problems. There's a line to nod to the fact that there are problems, but really there needs to be more than that, because budgets are being decimated across Welsh Government, local authority and so forth. So yes, it must be a priority for the next whoever's in government in Westminster to negotiate a proper fair funding deal for Wales. I haven't really enjoyed seeing the sort of conflict with Northern Ireland at the moment, saying, oh, well, why do they deserve you know, a budgetary increase? You know, we have to acknowledge the fact that Stormont hasn't been sitting, that they may not have been receiving certain funds during that time. They've been run by civil servants effectively. So, you know, I really don't want to pit the devolved nations against one another. So we need to be going to Westminster and saying why Wales needs that funding, not why somewhere else shouldn't get it, you know. That's all I would say.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I want to pay credit here to Plaid Cymru, because they are continuing to debate and to challenge on this issue. And they're continuing to talk about the fact that we in Wales must look at our tax raising powers. We need to look at how we're going to generate income here in Wales. We mustn't always just be reliant on a Westminster government and just criticising them all the time. That is about a fairer settlement, but that is about varying the tax bands, for example, so that we can raise taxes here, and that makes a difference to us here in Wales. And that, you know, I want more welfare benefits power, so that we can look at our welfare benefit system, and we can change things, which is what Scotland have got. They've got the power to vary. So, you know, there's lots that we can do here to help our communities financially. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about saying we can put more money into your pockets. We can help you with your bills. We can give you the opportunity to really do well in life, because we're fighting for more money and we're getting it. So it is that back to that deliverability once again, isn't it?
Well, one candidate seems to be able to get a lot of finances in for their candidate campaign. So I'm sure if they win, they'll be able to get quite a lot of money for
that's where I was going to take you next. You know, we're talking about money. Part of the recent criticism of the Senedd has been driven by this controversy on the election around donors. You know, the question of donors, who are they, and the amount that they're able to donate has been raised, and that has raised eyebrows. What's your take on that, Jane?
I mean, I'm staggered that somebody thinks they need £200,000 just for a leadership campaign anyway. I mean, what do they need it for? I don't know. You know, so aside from the fact that it's from somebody who's got a criminal record, which, you know, wouldn't you say straight away, I'm really sorry, that was you know, I'm giving the money back. I'm not interested in this person. I've got integrity. I think that's what they should be doing, and myself. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we need more. Well, it's just ridiculous, because it's come in the week, hasn't it, where the Conservatives have raised the amount of money that can be spent in a general election by political parties to £38 million in the short campaign. £38 million. I mean, we've never spent that in 10 years. And it, you know, we go, are we going down the American route where it's all about the donors, it's all about the money? Welsh Labour have got access to money through the trade unions, Conservatives through the bankers and the business world. You know, I think Plaid Cymru and Liberal Democrats and the Greens and the other smaller parties, there's no route or access to us. We raise our money as much as we can, but it's ridiculous. You know, I'd like us all just to say, you know, £50 and that's the end of it. You just...
Yeah. So some way to make it fair, isn't it? For those who are listening and not watching it on our recording, they might have not noticed I was shaking my head seeing that number of millions and millions, whilst, you know, here in Wales in particular, we've got the highest levels of child poverty. Yeah, that just doesn't sit nicely, does it? Anything there? Bethan, your take on some of this question of donors?
Well, I mean, what I will say is if it's within the rules that they're allowed to accept that money, then I'm not really one for saying, well, you shouldn't be able to accept it. But where I agree with Jane is that you need to be looking at the credentials and looking to see the background of the people who are giving that money. I mean, it is amazing because obviously I'm from a party where, you know, quite often we're asking individuals for donations for elections, and we don't raise the funds that other parties do. So I don't want to be like in a jealous stance here, but you know, again, as long as everything's done properly, I don't see a problem with it. But it is a big load of money for an internal election that I would think would be better used actually for an external election at you know, with Welsh general election or the UK general election. So yeah, where my concern lies is everything done appropriately? Are the people ones that you can trust? And I think that's perfectly legitimate. Should there be caps on that funding? Well, that's for the Labour Party. That's not for me to tell the Labour Party to do. For external elections, of course, all political parties then can have a view as to how much should be spent, who should be able to give, and what not. You know, it does rile me somewhat that trade unions just seem to, you know, give effortlessly to Labour when over the years they have been administering the cuts in Wales. And this goes for most of the trade unions. It seems to me it doesn't matter that happens; they will still give that money, and that's where I feel that a change of government is needed to really shake them up a bit and say, well, you know, what different parties in leadership bring to Wales, and what more could we do from that? That's where I would come from.
Definitely. Bethan, you mentioned tales of some other party members who've received a union vote in the election and have voted for candidates they think will be easier for their party to face at the next Senedd election. And you've both expressed views on both candidates. But if I was to push you, do you have a preference on who you'd like to face in 2026 as the next FM?
I don't know. I'm going to be really, you know, and that's not political, you know, I'm going to not say who I want because I don't want to jeopardize anything. I will say this, they both got good qualities. I like Jeremy a lot. He's a Welsh speaker. Be great to have a gay person as a First Minister. Vaughan, you know, has a lot of background, and again, great to have a Black minority ethnic First Minister as well. I don't know who I'll have that friend request from when the cooperation agreement ends, which is what the question was to me the day I was elected. So I don't know. I really don't know. That's the honest position I'm in. I think there's pros and cons of both, so we'll see.
I think that's a fair answer.
And not awaiting a cabinet request then, Jane?
No, do you know, I had that question as well, and yeah, no, loads. You know, the media was saying there'll be lots more swimming pools in Powys, and you know, etc., etc. They'll both have different styles. That's not just their policies, but their style will be very different. And I think we'll have an opportunity to see that for a few months before the cooperation agreement ends with Plaid Cymru in December. So yeah, we'll see.
Thanks. Bethan, what do you think around Plaid? Who would they like to face?
I think it would be harder for Plaid potentially with someone like Jeremy, because obviously he speaks Welsh. He's from a Welsh community in Neath. Perhaps they would see it like, as if it's that triangulation of having that person that may be able to appeal to the nascent Welsh language voters. So maybe that would be more of a difficulty for Plaid than Vaughan Gething, for example, who maybe wouldn't be able to sort of walk into rural Wales as easily and get the same appeal as Jeremy would, by virtue of perhaps knowing the area better. Because actually some of those areas are quite rural, having represented them myself is why I say it. There's areas of Cardiff, I suppose, that are quite rural, but may not have the same nuances in rurality as Jane has mentioned earlier. So they will both have their challenges in different worlds, I think. I was on a panel with Jeremy on Radio Cymru relatively recently, and someone in the Conservatives was beside me and said to Jeremy, "Oh well, if it means anything, I'm supportive of you, Jeremy." And he said, "Your support doesn't help me, thanks very much." So I think I'll leave on that as well. Me telling you if I support one or the other is really not going to change their outlook and or make a difference to their leadership careers. So I don't think it really matters who I would support at the end of the day.
Okay, and I think what I've heard from both of you throughout the whole pod is that really what the Welsh public want to see is someone that will listen to them, someone who will make sure that their voice is heard, and that's really what we want to see from that First Minister. It's not so much about them; it's about our communities and those communities being heard by that First Minister. Just before we finish, Jane, I'd like to ask a little bit more about your spring conference. That's where you've been this weekend. How did it go? And where are the Liberal Democrats in Wales right now?
Oh yeah, no, thank you. We just finished. We had our spring conference in Cardiff. It was the highest number of people who've been to a conference for many, many years since pre-COVID. So we were really pleased to see that. We've got some brilliant young people. That's what inspires me all the time, is seeing the young Liberals there, or young people in any political party, I think, is just such an inspiration. So that was exciting. It went well. We had some really healthy debates, on, with lots of different views. We had an emergency motion on the sustainable farming scheme, on the farming and agricultural issues, different views on that as well. So it went well. Thank you very much. Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Fab. Well, thank you both for joining us this evening. Just before we do finish, one final question. We're looking at it being what I call Women's Christmas, but everyone else will know as International Women's Day coming up this week. Are you up to anything exciting over the next week as part of those celebrations?
I'm doing a panel on that day, so that's going to be really great. But I'm also connecting with the Association for Freedom in Iran, and that's, we must never ever forget the rights that we have here in Wales as women, compared to the rights of women all over the world. But if we think about Iran in particular, so yeah, I think International Women's Day is about us saying, let's make sure we keep our freedoms, but let's make sure we support those women across the world who don't have them as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Jane. Bethan?
Well, in the morning, I'm getting my hair cut because I think on International Women's Day, I deserve it. And frankly, I'm going grey, so I need to look after myself. And then in the afternoon, there's a Mother's Day vigil at Queen Street, Cardiff, organised by Welsh Women for Gaza, for those who are interested in the Palestinian cause at the moment. And then in the evening, there's a launch of a new network for women at the Temple of Peace. So I understand that you're coming with me, Sarah. So trying to, Beth Baldwin, I met her when she was campaigning about type 1 diabetes. Many, many years ago, she put a petition into the Senedd, and she's trying to get more women to come together who are in business, share ideas, share best practice, and big up other women. And I think of no better way to celebrate International Women's Day than doing that.
Fab. And one final plug, just because I was at Gething for Cymru this afternoon. There will be a new exhibit opening next Saturday, so Saturday the 9th, that's celebrating the Women's Peace Petition and 100 years of that. So thank you so much to both of you. If people want to hear from either of you on social media, where can they find you? Jane?
Gosh, well, look, here's somebody who's going to admit that I've come off Twitter and I've come off Facebook. That's me personally, because as Bethan will know, it's a hard place to be as a politician, but particularly a female politician. However, they can go to @Dodds Jane and they'll see some stuff as well. So please, do that. But, we need to move to a place where social media is much safer for, and I'm sure that's another podcast coming up. Just keep an eye out on those. Yeah.
Definitely. I think we could be here for a whole other hour if we started to talk about that. Yeah. Bethan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram and I've just joined TikTok as Bethan Maeve. I am on Twitter still, but I really just go on there to amplify stuff I'm doing. I don't go on for debates anymore, purely for the same reasons of Jane. It just wear you down. And so there's plenty of places people can find me. I'm vocal enough on many issues.
Thank you both. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then you can find more from Hiraeth on various podcast apps. We are on all the socials at Hiraeth Pod. And if you want to support us with your wallet as well as your ears, you can do so from just £3 a month at patreon.com/Hiraeth Pod. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.